Welcome back, everybody, to another live stream on the YouTube channel. We've got another fun guest. We're going to talk with Brendan from the brands Wolftooth and Otso and talk about how one company begat the other. Super interesting story. Before I get going, a little bit of housekeeping. If you guys are digging these videos and you want to participate, you can join us in our Patreon community. You get access to the live stream and you get to ask your question directly. And we've got some fun guests coming up in the next couple of weeks. We've got our friend Martina from Swift Industries. Ultra Romance is going to talk about the Ultra Dynamico tires. Jay Ritchie is going to give us a tour of his bag making studio. We're going to have happy hour with the Camp and Go Slow folks this weekend. So lots of good stuff as a Patreon member. That said, let's hop in with our guest today. Welcome to the channel, Brendan.
Thanks, Russ. Glad to be here.
So you guys are kind of an interesting position. You have two companies, both Wolftooth and Otso. Let's talk about Wolftooth a little bit. What was the first product you guys actually started making?
To back up a little bit, we were all engineers working in the tech world over at a company called Seagate Technology. They make hard drives. Our founder and business partner, Mike, was in the same group as me in the robotics area, making basically the robots that built the hard drives. Dan was in the design area, and I remember walking over to Mike's, we were working on a project together, walking over to his desk one day and looking at his CAD screen. I'm like, that's a chainring. He's like, yeah, that's a chainring. And then just a few days later, he drops one on my desk. He's like, I want you to try it. It was a wide, narrow 104 BCD chainring, pretty commonplace now. And I remember putting it on my bike, and I'm like, oh, I don't know how well this is going to work. So I had like a chain guide on there, and at the time there weren't really clutch derailleurs and all that. And long and behold, it did hold the chain, and then one thing led to another, and we started selling them on MTBR forums. Basically, it's like, hey, we have these. Anybody want one? We don't have a web store. We don't have anything.
Yeah.
And just kind of progressed from there, literally from like basement, garage to basements to 3 basements to a small building to now we have a little bigger place. So.
And back to basements.
Yeah. Hopefully not.
Yeah. So I think one of the products that our viewers in the channel is most familiar with is the RoadLink and the TanPan, just because we've been doing a lot of derailleur hacks. How did those come about?
The RoadLink, I was walking the halls one day and I was like, there has to be a way. And so we started looking, has to be a way to make a road derailleur accommodate a bigger range. And we were working with Mark Basilier from a company called Linderay at the time. And so I called Mark and I'm like, hey, I have this idea. I think we can do it. And here's what I think it is. Because we had the GoatLink at the time, but nothing for the road side. And so we started batting around ideas, and he sent over some CAD files. And then about 3 weeks later, we had the first prototypes and we put it on. It's like, wow, this went on and it just worked, like super easy. And so the RoadLink was pretty easy. The TanPan was a bigger development, and that kind of came in when there was no clutches. Funny enough, the TanPan's still relevant today just because of the range of some of the mountain bike rear derailleurs. But we had been running, I guess the popular term now is mullet build, but we were running that on all our bikes. So we were trying to figure out a way to get big old, mountain cassettes. I think we were running, the highest was like a 1046. Mm-hmm. And trying to figure out how to get that to work on a road bike. And so that's where the TanPan was born out of, because the RoadLink doesn't get you much beyond 40 or 42. And we wanted to go bigger for the 1x mullet gravel build. So,
mm-hmm. Those are two of my personal products, two of my personal favorite products of you guys, just because it's led to so many videos.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Like the Wolftooth, the product line has kind of evolved. When we started out, it was chain rings, and then we had a lot of like derailleur modifications and hacks, and now we're really more focused on like you've tried the encase system, grips, all that stuff, because there was an opportunity at the time and it was great. We took advantage of it, but a lot of the OEMs have now come around to kind of answering your Advent that we were just talking about, your new Advent 10-speed 1148 is a classic example of an OEM like listening and saying, hey, there's an opportunity here to do a full drivetrain. So they're still great products, but like as a company, we're more focused on the evergreen standalone products rather than the hacks, if you will. As fun as the hacks are.
So typically, like, what's your timeline in terms of, I've got a great idea and then, rapid prototyping and it coming to market? Is that a couple months or a couple years?
It actually varies probably in that range. It depends how difficult the product is to develop. In Case, for example, took like a year and a half, mainly because we were trying to figure out how to accommodate, I think we succeeded, about 95 to 98% of handlebars out there.
Mm-hmm.
It was, and figuring out the whole sleeve design. So one, things didn't rattle, two, would fit all those different designs. That just took a long time because you're trying different stuff and it works on this bar, but doesn't work on that bar. And this is okay, but it's too complicated for the consumer. And then we'll get other things like, just like a new chain ring. Like we're going to be launching a new chain ring next week for the 8-bolt mounting that SRAM uses on all the new Access stuff. Like that was basically figuring out the dimensions and the geometry of that spline and making a chain ring. So that one took a couple days. And then there's everything in between, depending on, how much testing you need to do. Like when it comes to a chain rings, we got those pretty dialed. It's kind of like cut and paste to some extent with some engineering. But if you're inventing from new, I would say average, Russ, is probably 9 to 18 months.
Do you guys do kind of quick prototyping in your offices?
Yeah.
Do you have a 3D printer? What's the workflow like?
Yeah, definitely. We 3D print. The 3D printers are running most days, and our both our two main design engineers. One is my business partner, the other Anthony. They both have 3D printers at home as well. So like right now, we have a super skeleton crew here in the office, and they're working from home, but they're still, absolutely rapid prototyping. I mean, it's just an amazing technology. And, a lot of the 3D printing prototypes are really about just quick fit function. Like you don't actually get to ride them, but you can put them on a bike and see how it looks, for example. Aesthetics matter. And then there's kind of like this evolution. So when you get 3D printing to a level, there's some pretty high-end 3D printing. You can print tie, you can print stainless, you can print aluminum. There's also some of these shops like First Cut is a business that'll if you have an idea and you design it up, you can send it off to them and, probably for $100 or $200, you can have an aluminum prototype in 2 weeks.
Wow.
And then once you get there, then kind of the next step is to do a pre-production run with your supplier. We build a lot of our own stuff, but we also have a couple suppliers around the US we use. And then you run production. So it's kind of a process of getting more and more refined. I always joke that like half the parts on my bike are not anodized because I get all the leftover prototype crap that we can't sell.
Nice. I'm curious. I've tinkered a little bit with 3D printing just to make my own bike doodads. What software do you guys use?
We use SolidWorks as our, and then you just output the file, like an IGIS or something like that, depending on the printer. And then the printers all have their own, like the 3D printers we have in house are actually like $300 printers because they print what we need. Getting a higher level print requires a significant investment. And what we've watched happen and continues to happen is the 3D printer technology is evolving so fast that say you go buy like a $70,000 printer because this thing's just going to be awesome for you. In a year, it's going to be out of date. And so if we need nice 3D prints, we use a 3D printing firm that has all the latest and greatest. But back to your question, it's just each printer has its own kind of translation software, and ours are really basic. Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's talk about Otso. Like, at what point in the business of Wolftooth were you guys like, hey, let's start the bike brand?
It was 3 years in, I think. 3 years in. Because of where we live, we have to ride fat bikes a lot. And at least Mike and I had significant knee and hip issues with the really wide Q factors. And And we've been kicking around for years, man, somebody should just make like a fat bike that doesn't have such a wide Q factor. And I remember distinctly coming home from a ride, like hobbling around my house with a sore knee. And I'm like, I want to go out and take some measurements. This has to work. And so I did, literally wrote them on an envelope, came back in and I sent them to Mike, and Mike's such a wizard on CAD and engineering. I think it was like 2 days and he had like the bottom bracket area design, not the final 3D and all that, but like the crux of it to say, yeah, I think we can do this. And so the other thing we wanted to do was make sure we didn't create a new standard. Not that there's a whole lot of standards left around, but we wanted to use an existing set of cranks. And so basically we took the 83 millimeter downhill cranks and built a bike around that. Most fat bikes are built, you take a tire and you try and build a bike around the tire. We took the crank set and built the bike around the crank set, and whatever tire clearance fell out, it actually ends up being plenty of tire clearance. So that was the genesis of Otso, was the desire for that. But then also we've been avid gravel riders since before gravel was cool, maybe like a lot of your audience. And so we saw the opportunity with the Warwick, our stainless steel bike, to come in with a little bit differentiated product because it had 29 by 2.1 tire clearance, adjustable geometry. And so we kind of paired those together and made that our brand and our focus as a brand.
Mm-hmm. So let's go back to the fat bike for a second. What was the design challenge to have that low Q factor but still fit around the tire?
Fat bikes are kind of an interesting story because they're one of the few, you can maybe say this about gravel, but they're one of the few new kind of ground up designs in the cycling industry in a while. Now they've fallen out of favor for people that don't have snow, and I get that they're not the most nimble thing on dirt, but some people still like them. But because it was new, it was kind of, there was a design created and a geometry created, and certain people were driving that geometry, and it was mainly like long distance Iditarod type, people riding in super deep snow areas, in remote wilderness. That's really where a lot of the design came out of for fat bikes. So I look at like, the early 907s or the early fat packs, super long chain stays, 5-inch tire clearance, all this stuff. But what we found was that we were not riding the bikes the same way that expedition riders were riding the bikes. And so when we looked at the bike design, it wasn't just about the Q factor. It was like, well, how do we want this thing to ride? So it's something we would want to ride in the summer, maybe with some plus wheels on it. And so a lot of the driving forces were wider, got to have fatter tires. And if you do that and you design a bike around that fatter tire, you end up in this really wide Q factor. There's just no way around that. If you take a step back and say, well, maybe I don't have to have a 5-inch tire, maybe a 4.5 is enough. But starting with the crank and working your way back. And that's what we found is starting with the crank, working the way back, you can fit the 4.3, 4.5 tires with that narrow Q factor. If you want a 5-inch tire, that's not our bike. And so it was just kind of a follow the leader for a lot of years in the fat bike. And that's where we saw the opportunity, was to not do what everybody else is doing and just say, hey, this is something different.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I feel like in some ways, gravel is going through a similar process where the tires are getting ever bigger. You know, at some point it's got to stop, right?
Yeah, I mean, actually, we're trying to write some content for our Otso site right now, and I'm working on a blog piece that hopefully we can have up here in a week or two about the different tire widths and what they're good for. Because we get so many different OEM tires in, and we're trying all this stuff, probably like you kind of figure out like, yeah, there is a limit. I had 29 by 2.25s on my Wahila C, and it was fun, but it wasn't necessarily fast. And then, the whole range, there's like, and that was good for certain things, but that's the whole key with gravel. And the cool thing about the gravel bikes is, if you're willing to change tires, you have multiple wheel sets, you can really have a bike with some pretty split personality to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a lot of the viewers on the channel are super big fans of 650B. No coincidence, just because I am too. Do you guys have a sense of how many bikes you send out with 700 versus 650B?
I don't know if I should answer that question if you guys are big 650 fans.
Oh no!
No, I mean seriously, probably 95% are 700.
Right?
Yeah, especially what we're seeing. So part of what drove the 650 thing, Russ, was that was the first wide tire gravel, first of all. But second of all, a lot of these frames couldn't accommodate the 29 by say 47 or 44. And so because they couldn't accommodate it, it's like, well, if you need a wide tire, which the wide tire is great for loose gravel, shoulder season like we're in now and all that, I get it. But those frames couldn't accommodate it, so they had to do 650B. Now I think what you're going to start to see is that some of the frames like ours fit the bigger 29er, people will kind of be rolling back towards 29. Not dissimilar from what happened in mountain bike world, right? I mean, mountain bike world is kind of converting back to mostly 29er too, even though there are some 650 fans like me.
Yeah. I mean, I like it primarily just because I end up riding smaller frames, and I've yet to ride, a bike with, 29 by 2 point something where the head angle isn't flacked out, so I'm not smacking my toe on it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's where we do sell most of the 650 is when we have somebody that's in, say, a 52 or smaller frame or our size small, because the toe overlap is actually pretty bad if you run like a 29 by 2.0 on a small. I mean, pretty much guaranteed to hit your toes.
Yeah, unless the bike is like full on like chamois Hagar style. Then
yeah, that's a drop bar mountain bike, and we don't. That's not the goal with our drop bar bikes. It's interesting for sure.
Yeah,
it'll be interesting to see if that catches, or if people are like, when I want to ride a mountain bike, I'll ride a mountain bike.
So like we were early adopters of evangelizing the gravel bike, and a couple years ago, people were saying it was a made up kind of category. It's just a cross bike. Do you think gravel bike geometry has settled on something unique, or is it more of kind of a refinement of a pre-existing bike design?
Oh, I would definitely say, I mean, it's a refinement insofar as it's still a drop bar bike with generally a little longer chain stays than a CX bike. Little longer reach is usually good, little slacker head tube angle. That's kind of like the generals of what a gravel bike is. But what the gravel bikes really brought about is wide tire clearance. It was kind of funny when you watch the evolution, from a couple of years ago, it was like the tire manufacturers wanted to do different stuff, but it didn't fit on any of the frames. So like the tires came out and they were like leading the frame design. The frame design wasn't there, and there's like, all these great tires coming out, and it's like, well, that doesn't fit on any frames. And now it's kind of like the frames have caught up, and then it's really opened up, and I've seen a lot of some of the stuff that's going to be coming out in the coming months from tire manufacturers. They're coming out with some great treads. Things like the new Rattler tire from WTB, like just a really nice tread. You can ride gravel on it and then hop on some single track. And so that's kind of the evolution I've seen. Geometrically, they're different for sure. I think the bigger thing though is like an old CX bike isn't going to fit some of the tire combinations you're going to want.
Yeah. Have you guys had to change the geometry of the Workin or the Wahila over the last couple of years, or is it pretty much stayed the same from when you first designed?
No, it hasn't changed. Interestingly, so like because we have the tuning chip system, if you're not familiar with it, it's adjustable dropout, but it's angled, and so when you move it forward, it actually raises the BB and steepens the head tube angle. And so what you end up with in the forward position is almost identical to a cyclocross race bike in all geometric aspects, other than the top tube isn't as flat as some CX race bikes. And as an aside, I don't know if you follow racing or at the World Cup level, but there was a World Cup racer racing on a gravel bike this year, and somehow he was top 10, and the bike didn't implode, and the world didn't explode, and all these things. So if you have an adjustable geometry like that, and you can get the bottom bracket to a sufficient height, because CX bikes do need a little higher bottom bracket because you're cornering and you don't want to clip a pedal. But then when you flip our chip around, it ends up being like something closer to road touring geometry. It's like 440 millimeter chainstays. And the middle position is very much, I'll call it traditional gravel. 430 chainstays, pretty nominal, head tube angle for gravel and all that. So I think you're going to see more bikes like that where people are trying to make this their one drop bar bike. They aren't too interested in having a high-end road bike and a high-end gravel bike and a high-end CX bike. They'd rather have something they can change the tires or change the wheels and then make that their bike.
Yeah. I've seen some bikes in the mountain bike world, like maybe one or two in the gravel world, where they kind of apply a similar like tuning chip concept, but to the fork to adjust the offset.
Yep.
You guys have any plans for something like that in the future?
It's something we're looking at because that matters too. It's a good way to adjust the fork. I think we have a number of ideas. In fact, we were just talking about that specific idea yesterday. The trick is doing it in a way that's aesthetically pleasing. Looks matter. They do. People care about how their bikes look. And then doing it in a way that you can explain to customers. Even, the tuning chip's fairly simple when it comes down to it. There's 3 positions, and we're actually working on a single speed one too, but there's 3 positions. And like, even a lot of our customers are like, if we'll see them and they'll be talking about how they like the bike. And we're like, have you ever played with the tuning chip? They're like, nope, haven't touched it. Like they're just not into it. So like if you add a tuning chip in the back and this thing in the front, and like all of a sudden it's like, well, where am I? And
yeah.
So a lot of it's about educating the customer when you put in adjustment, like making sure people have some kind of frame for reference on what they should be doing for what situation.
Yeah.
So it's something we're looking at for sure.
And my hunch is that most people probably just like set it and forget it and they acclimate and don't think about it again. I'm curious to try one with adjustable fork offset just to see, do the trail calculations and see like if what I anticipate the change to be is actually the case. So.
Yeah, well, and I mean, again, when we're talking about like a 650 versus 47 versus a 29 by 50, like that Gravel King 29 by 50, geez, that's a big diameter difference. And if you're talking about handling, keeping the trail the same on the front end of the bike, that matters. I mean,
for sure.
If you don't care about the handling change, that's fine. But
yeah.
So yeah, it'll be an interesting evolution. That's where I see, back to gravel being kind of like evolutionary or revolutionary. What I see, the more revolutionary part about the gravel is these frames that accommodate wider tires, but then the components are starting to come out, like we talked about the tires. But even look at what it's done to handlebars and recent. I'm running a 46.
It's broken all the road rules. Like people are like so confused.
I know. We have some like pretty strict roadies on staff here, and it's really like some of the handlebars they see come in, and they're just kind of like not that comfortable looking at them even. Especially those really wide ones. We got some of those. I think it's from Curve or somebody. Like that.
The Walmer. Yeah.
Yeah. They're like 580 millimeters wide.
Yeah. I like the gravel aesthetic, for lack of better words, because it is like such a mishmash. I feel like there are a lot of people that like to combine things or not do things according to the rules, So it kind of it's a little bit more embracing of that.
Well, and let's not forget, probably the biggest thing that's driven us all to gravel is cell phones and people on them.
Oh, for sure.
Cars.
Yeah.
We pretty much don't ride road around here anymore because of that.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. Like I've gotten, like Laura and I toured, for 3 years, and we did all these paved roads, and looking back at it, a lot of those roads we probably wouldn't ride again. I don't know if it's because we've gotten older and just more like risk averse in terms of paved roads, or it's truly gotten more dangerous. I mean, it seems as if it has with all that kind of added distraction.
Definitely has.
Yeah.
And people have gotten more angrier, I feel like, although maybe this situation we're in right now will change that. People seem to be a lot more polite lately on the roads.
Yeah. Cool. We're about halfway point. So I'm going to open up the questions to the crew here on the Zoom call. So if you've got a question for Brendan or about Wolftooth or Otso, raise your little blue hand. Come on, Andy, you've got to have a question. You always ask a good one. No question yet? Oh, you've got one? Okay, I'm going to unmute our friend Andy here. Where'd he go? Okay, Andy, go.
Hey, Brendan, how are you?
Hey, Andy.
So, of all of the tools that I carry with me, yours is one of the favorite. I used to have to schlep one of these around, and now it's that.
Yeah. You know, it hurts way less to crash on ours.
Yeah. Tell me, what was the genesis of this tool, and how did I mean, the design, it seems so obvious, but it's got the tire lever, it's got the quick links, and then they all sit in there nice. What kind of walk me through the design process of that tool, because it's really one of my favorites.
That's the one. So that one breaks the rule of what I told Russ earlier about how long things take. Dan, my business partner, had that idea when we were at Seagate, and I think that tool took 3.5 or 4 years to make. And not because we didn't know how, but it just kept falling to the back burner. It's like, well, crap, there's a new XTR crankset. We got to make those chain rings now. We were a small staff and small company, and we even showed, so we had some prototypes, Andy, and we showed it to a few people, and they're like, meh. And we're like, really? Okay, well, maybe it's not that great of an idea. We'll work on it later. And then eventually we got working on it again, and with quite a creative staff around here that all ride a lot. And so the 6 features, when we started adding the valve core remover and the valve nut remover and that stuff, was just kind of people saying, well, what else can we put in this? Mm-hmm. And so that one took like 3.5 years. And then even when we had it ready and we showed some like our biggest customers, they were still like, nah. We're like, huh, well, let's make 500 of them. So we made 500. We put them for sale, and they sold out in like 6 hours. Oh, wow. We're like, oh, well, I guess it was a good idea. And so then we had our own internal machine shop. We called the guy that managed our machine shop. We're like, hey, I know it's late at night, but is there any way we can get some material coming? So we basically took 2 of our CNC mills, 2 of our 4 at the time, turned them on full gas, and that's all they ran for like, I don't know, 6 months. So long story, Andy. Took 3.5 years, but only because we were not working on it very hard. And yeah, sometimes you just, that's probably the biggest struggle, that we have, is like, we have not been very good predictors of what's going to be a hit. Like, we think we know, and sometimes we're right, but sometimes we're like, why don't people like that? It's awesome. And other times we're like, I don't know if anyone's going to buy this. And then it's just, we can't make enough. So,
well, so I could figure out some of them, but what are the 6? So you got tire lever. Yeah. Quick link, right? You got core removers.
Yep. Then there's a valve nut, is like right behind
that one.
No, it's right behind the pinching part of the part that pinches the chain.
Oh, that one?
Right there, yeah. So sealant ever gets on there, it like fuses the valve nut to the.
Oh yeah.
You can't get it out. If you have to put a tube in, the valve has to come out.
That right there.
And then the quick link remover. So.
And storage.
Yeah. 6.
One of my favorites.
Unless I can.
And I've opened beer bottles with this one too. So just yeah. that can get a beer bottle.
Oh, definitely. It's 70-75. You're not gonna hurt it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the pack pliers. It's one of my most used tools on the channel, because I'm constantly.
If you like that one, just wait a few months. You'll like what's coming.
Yeah. I'm constantly changing drivetrains, so constantly using it to remove chains, but also to set the link. Sometimes I just can't get enough force, like on the stand. So pulling it open and using it to set the link's been super useful. Yeah,
we had a number of people say, when I bought this, I just kind of bought it and thought I'd never use it. And I've used it like 4 times on the trail since. And it's not always for yourself. Sometimes it's like you see somebody sitting there and chain in hand and like, hey, you need some help?
Yeah. Cool. Any other questions in the Zoom? Raise your blue hand, and I'll start looking at some.
I saw a real hand raised by Brian.
Brian, is he still in here? Yeah. Hey, Brian, you've got the floor.
Awesome. Thank you. I had a question about ride quality of stainless steel frames, and how does that compare to other steels?
Yeah. The stainless frame rides similarly, but part of that's how we designed it and tuned it. So we use a 300 series stainless, and when we butt the tubes, it actually ends up cold working out. So they get what ends up being material property closer to like a 400 series stainless. And so that stiffens the front triangle, but the rear triangle we didn't butt. It's not cold work, so you get a very traditional steel ride out of the rear. And so kind of when you mash the two together, what you get is a little bit more stiffness to pedaling and steering, but still that ride quality in the back. So
Okay.
it's still like the steel is real ride. It's still there.
Okay. I thought maybe, with the addition of chromium to steel, that's one of the elements of stainless steel, that it may stiffen it somehow, make it feel a little firmer.
It really just depends the grade you use and then how you treat it. Again, that budding process really increases the modulus significantly, which is good in spots where you want it to be. But, but not good on the rear triangle necessarily.
All right.
Cool. Great question. Sweet. Anyone else in the Zoom have a question? Let me look in the YouTube comments. See, Jared Good asks, will we see camo chainring options in 38 to 50? Do you guys do camo chainrings?
Yeah, so camo is our chain line and material optimization is what camo stands for. Basically, it's a set of spiders, and a set of chain rings that the spiders are various offsets and various mountings. And maybe I'll step back and just explain why we did camo and where it kind of falls in with like direct mount chain rings and stuff. And so camo really solves three main problems. First of all, if you want to do a stainless steel chain ring, they last like 5 times longer. You ended up with a pretty heavy, big piece of steel. And so much like your center lock rotors or whatever, camo takes an aluminum spider and you mate a stainless ring to it. The other thing is direct mount chain rings, you have to pull your crankset off. So say you're going to a race, you don't have the course, especially for maybe a single speeder. You'd be like, oh, I need a 34 today, and I have a 32 and I got to pull my crankset off. Well, this allows you to bolt on and bolt off a chain ring with 5 simple bolts. The third main reason we did it is kind of the lack of standards in a lot of situations. This allowed us to have elliptical and round, all these different sizes for E13, S-Works, old S-Works cranks, all the Cannondale has 4 different offsets, all these, and offer all those. We couldn't, because of how few riders there are that actually need that, we might sell like 20 a year of this one certain offset with a certain spider. This allowed us to take, say, a Cannondale customer is like, I got to have an elliptical 32 for my AI crankset. Well, we have that in the form of you take this spider, you take this chain ring, you put them together. The reason we haven't done that on the gravel and road side is because basically some of those problems don't exist. Road is much more standardized as far as offsets. There's far fewer direct mount cranksets. They're becoming more common for sure. So if we did camo for road, it would be more like a series of 110 BCD spiders, which 110 is a really common 5-bolt pattern. Probably do something like that.
Cool. So what is your litmus test for putting a product into production? I mean, you mentioned how it's
I told you we guess wrong most of the time. So pretty much we just toss it all up in the air and heads or tails, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's several factors. Every product early on, because we have tons of ideas, and we're probably like you guys, we're always like, oh, we should do this, and then the next day, oh, we should do this. Some of it you need to focus, but also you have to very early on look at a business case. And given that we make most of our stuff in the US, a lot of times the business case will be the go or no go, mainly because we're competing against overseas manufacturing. And there's only a certain price people will pay for something. Like they'll pay a premium for our products because, you know, we try and keep them high quality and engineering and the looks and all that. But like, you can't, if our chain rings were double the price of a cheaper chain ring, that would be a problem. If it's 20% more and you get more life out of it and it holds a chain better and those things, people are okay with that. And so we basically have this big long list of things. We look at how hard is it to develop, how much time will it take. If it passes those kind of two, like we think we know how to do this, we have some great ideas, we think there's a market. The next thing is to like look at some early designs and try to understand like, you know, what's the rough cost and then what would we have to charge for it and will people even pay that? If we would have done in case, it's a pretty complicated set of stuff, there's lots of tools involved, and I think, you know, people at first were like $120, but it's like, man, we were happy to get to $120 because that very easily, that product could have inflated to $200 real quick, just with all the intricate parts and all that stuff. And so we realized like we were probably at the upper limit of where we could sell that tool. If it would have been 200, we probably would not have pursued that project. And very early on, we had a bill of materials that suggested, yeah, we're going to be in that range. So it's a combination of things. We got to have some confidence that people are going to buy it, that we're going to be right. Like I said, we're mostly wrong, but we got to have some confidence. And then given that, we'll go. The other thing we do look at though is like history. So if the pack plier sells well, for example, one might pursue a different version of that. If a certain chainring type sells well, one might assume that we're going to kind of push that line further. So it's that was a lot of hand waving, but basically we have to be business conscious because a lot of times we'll end up hitting kind of a dead end with our manufacturing costs. And we don't want to cut corners on the product and produce a product that's inferior just to make it low cost enough that people will buy it.
I have someone asked a question, I forget who it was, but how, like, what are some of your challenges as a smaller bike brand getting, you know, your name out to market, and what's worked in terms of getting more people to recognize the brand?
Well, let me start by saying we've had like, Otso needs a break, basically. I mean, it's doing well, but last year we had the trade war. This year we have the current pandemic situation, which is pretty horrible. And it's just those kind of things when you're a small company are really, really hard to absorb. We've managed through it by being creative, keeping the staff lean. We also have the ability to flex our staff between brands. If it's a slow season for Otso, we can pretty much guarantee we'll have Wolftooth stuff they can do. But I would say those two things have been the biggest challenge because, again, like with lead times and all this stuff, you just can't, you have to plan for success so far ahead that you can't always just deal with that. Now, Otso is doing great now, and part of that is creating the brand recognition. It's just taken a really long time. And versus Wolftooth, like a Wolftooth part's like $50 to $100, maybe $150 in some cases. And people are like, yeah, I'll just try that. If it's horrible, then, oh, well, you know, not really. People aren't going to want to throw away their money, but you know what I mean? Like, but if it's a bike, we sold, so there's all this metric stuff you can watch. And there was a customer that recently bought a frame from us that was on our site like 50 times. Like, he came back and made sure it was the right one and all that. And, you know, in one sense, we're like, wow, it's cool that he bought ours after, because he's clearly a very, you know, well-educated and knows what he wants. But in the same way, it's like, it's a slow burn with bikes.
Sure.
And even if you feel like your product's great, you still need to have this marketing engine behind it. And Kurt, who you talked to quite a bit, has took over marketing last year, and he's done an amazing job with like the social media and the advertising and all that stuff to really make it just to get the word out. Because like I said, you have the greatest product in the world. If nobody knows about it, nobody's going to buy it.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm kind of drawn to reviewing bikes from smaller brands, because I know that not everyone's going to have the opportunity to go down to the local, bike shop and throw a leg over an Otso. But if I can talk about it and kind of put it within the spectrum of other bikes that they may have tried, like something from Salsa or something from Surly, then it at least like helps them triangulate what the experience is like to ride the bike.
Yeah. And then, beyond that, Otso, we've done some real creative things that, because we're small, we can do them. So if you go on our site now, and you want a bike, like you can pretty much pick everything. I mean, it's a curated, like you can't buy any tire, but I think we selected 12 tires on there that you can choose from. So when you get your bike, it's exactly the way you want it. Bigger bike companies can't do that. That's their bike, and everything is usually assembled overseas. And you get what you get. You have your 4 models, your pro, comp, sport, whatever levels, and you get to choose those, and your color chosen. With ours, because we're small enough and nimble enough, we kind of we just build what people want. So that's actually the most fun for us, because a lot of times people are like, well, what would you put on your bike? And then you're like kind of like building the bike a lot of times during the day. So
Do you guys see more 1-by builds or 2-by builds?
I would say it's about split right now, Russ.
Yeah.
I would say it's about split right now. Probably the hottest build out there. The 2 hottest we're seeing are the GRX 800. So that's like the Ultegra level GRX. And then the Axis, SRAM Axis mullet build are kind of like the 2 for people that are building nicer bikes. And then like a lot of people are going for that GRX 600 as kind of an lower price point, entry level bike.
Are lots of people opting for the 4630, or what chainring combos are they going for?
Well, so for the 600, you get the 4630, and the 800 is 4831. So the 600 people are getting the smaller, and the 800 people are getting the bigger. I think for gravel, the 4630 is probably a better combo. Especially once, again, we talked about tire diameter, and like my favorite diameter and size right now is the 700 by 44, 43, somewhere in there. And that's big enough where that 46 with an 11 in back and that 44 millimeter tire, if you spin that out, you're pretty strong.
Yeah. I did a whole video on why, super huge gearing is kind of overrated. And I used Eddie Merckx as an example. Because when he set the hour record, it was I think he was doing maybe 90 gear inches, which is like a 50-13, 50-14. So it wasn't 52-11.
So we had a request from a university to make a 72 tooth chainring.
Oh, geez.
Because they were going for the land speed record on one of those like lay down bikes.
Yeah.
They're like, could you just make us one? And I'm like, no, sorry.
Nice. Any other questions for the folks in the Zoom? Any blue hands? If not, I'm going to go into YouTube chat here. If you guys are in YouTube chat, feel free to ask a question. Also, just let us know where you're watching from. Let's see. Alex asks, will Otso ever make a gravel bike that can do 27.5 by 2.6 or 29 2.4? What's the current max tire size of your gravel bikes?
Well, you tell me, Russ, is that a gravel bike?
Or
is that a
drop bar mountain bike?
Yeah, no, I'm being a little bit facetious, but like that's where it's kind of an interesting conversation. Like, where does gravel end and drop our mountain bike start? And, I mean, because to accommodate things like that, accommodate a 29 by 2.4, you do have to do things different with geometry that make it look kind of like a mountain bike.
Right.
I think there's a place for that bike. I absolutely do. but I don't think it would do the things you would do to make a bike do that, handle those specific tire dimensions, would make it less ideal for, say, the customer that's buying our Wahila C that maybe wants to do a couple gravel races, rides it on the road some, maybe hits a little single track. So yes, I definitely think that bike belongs in the Otso lineup, but I'd hesitate to call it just a gravel bike. It seems like that's more of a drop bar mountain bike to me. Probably put your big wide 58 millimeter, 580 millimeter bars on there.
Yeah. Let's see. We've got Stephen Phillips who says hello from New Zealand. Will Reynolds asks, where did you get the idea for suspension corrected gravel bike? And he's from Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Oh yeah. So I guess we didn't talk about that, but the Wahila C and Wahila S are 420 axle to crown. So for those that don't know, that's the center of the axle to the top of the fork where you put the crown race of the headset. And so ours is 420 millimeters. Basically every other gravel cyclocross bike is in that 395 to 400 range. The reason we did 420 is not because some people think we just chose that number. The reason we did 420 was actually because suspension corrected gravel forks like the Fox AX and the MRP all have that roughly 420 axle to crown. This brings up another interesting topic though, like when is suspension gravel gonna be a thing? And I don't know, Russ, have you spent any time on an AX or any of that?
I did. I think it was spec'd on a bomb track that I rode. And it was fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different experience. We had an AX set up with a left shifter as the lockout. So it was kind of cool you had a lockout there. I think what it's truly going to take though, again, back to us being vain and things having to look good, for gravel suspension to take off, we're going to need an inverted fork. Think about like the RS1, the RockShox RS1, cut down and slimmed out. Mm-hmm. Something like that is what it's going to take for front suspension gravel to kind of take off. We wanted to be ready for that when it comes. There are companies working on that right now. And so when you're designing a bike, like when we designed the Wahilas, it was like, well, what does the future look like? You know, and we got the wide tire thing, and we got the internal dropper routing, and we got the super compliant ride with the stiff pedaling. But what are the other things? And that was one of the things was suspension corrected.
Right.
We're probably ahead of our time. It doesn't really hurt us because it doesn't look that much different. And we had a fork. We designed a fork for it, but there's not really, just because of aesthetics, I think the suspension gravel forks haven't really taken off.
Yeah. Let's see. So we've got Joe Umbrell, who's watching from Pennsylvania. He says, great to meet you at the Philly Bike Expo.
Yeah, Kurt and Dan were out there.
Yeah. Let's see. So Chris Tuff asks, from Marin, California, are there plans to build on / expand the Brad system, or is it pretty set and done?
The BRAD system? Yeah, we're looking at, we're looking at a few more. We're always looking at more stuff. And even if it's just refinement of what we have a few more things coming for BRAD, nothing real soon. Some of it might be like, how do we combine Encase with BRAD? Like, how does that live together? Or other tools with BRAD. So we do get a fair amount of requests and input from customers, because BRAD, for those that don't know, BRAD is a system of rails that you basically mount to your bottle cage bosses. And then we make a bunch of different stuff that you can mount on these rails and move around. So it's a real tinkerer's kind of platform. Like we always say there's not a right or a wrong way to install BRAD. It's just there's different ways. And I mean, I spent hours in my basement moving stuff around and trying to get it just right. And so for gravel and bike packers and stuff, they really groove on it. And so we get and that type of customer generally has like all these other ideas about stuff you could do. And so that's kind of a fun product line, and that we don't necessarily know where it's going to go. We have some ideas and some new products, but some of that depends on where bike design goes and what people are doing with their bikes.
Yeah. And it's like Legos for your bike.
It is. It is. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So we got a question here from Steve Fuller in the Zoom. Steve, you've got the floor.
Hey, Brendan, you were talking about suspension just a little bit ago. Where do you see suspension on gravel bikes? Kind of the optimal suspension travel, and what are your thoughts on rear suspension travel?
So I think the travel on gravel, if we just call it gravel, it's not, because if we start talking about the drop bar mountain bikes, that's a whole different thing. Let's just focus on gravel. That's probably a 40 to 50 millimeter travel front. I honestly don't see, for gravel, again, not drop bar mountain bikes, for gravel, I don't see rear suspension really catching on for two reasons. One is weight, and then the other is just looks and complexity in an area of the bike where you're usually trying to put an extra bottle and stuff like that. I think if we look at gravel, it's like the road riders are coming in from this side, the mountain bikers are coming in from this side, and they smash together, and it has to be something that they both like. And I think what you're seeing out of, there is a Niner actually has a dual suspension bike out, and that's not dissimilar from a bike that I raced on 10 years ago, you know, as far as like geometry and travel and all that. And I think that type of bike is better positioned as a drop bar mountain bike. I think you'll see some of those, but I don't think it'll be like the gravel geometry.
Yeah, I was thinking back to kind of the same things like the old Moots YBB, and even like Celsius Dose Niner with that little relish shock in the back.
Yep.
You know, that versus, you know, there's been a lot of, I guess, advancements in suspension seat posts, and it seems like the suspension seat posts have kind of swallowed up a lot of what that rear travel on those bikes would have done.
Yeah, exactly.
10 years ago.
The beauty is if you didn't need the suspension seat post, or maybe you didn't want the travel, you can still buy that bike and just change the seat post. Mm-hmm. So I think for rear suspension, I think that's designing a bike that has proper compliance is really important. There's some gravel bikes and cyclocross bikes out there that ride really stiff. You don't want that either. But I think between rear end compliance, like you said, a suspension post, and then probably 40 millimeters up front, I think that's probably where gravel suspension lands. And drop bar mountain bikes, like, holy crap, yeah, you could definitely do. I actually think, you know, one of the coolest new suspension designs for that kind of thing out there is that new, it's called the ISO strut that Trek does on their top end cross country mountain bikes. If you're not familiar with it, check it out. It's a really cool design that aesthetically looks good. It's really pretty simple. You can have two bottles in your main frame and all that. I think there's places for that in the drop bar mountain bike world. Because remember, when you take suspension and a rear suspension and drop it to 60 millimeters, you don't have to have a lot of fancy kinematics.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions in the Zoom? Let's jump back over to the YouTube here. So someone's asking about the Loaf Grit suspension fork. I've not ridden that. How does that compare to other gravel suspension forks that you've ridden?
I've only spent probably 2 weeks on a Grit, so I mean, take that for what it is. The Grit, when I first got on it, so I'm about 150 pounds. So I'm not super heavy. And so when I first got on, I'm like, man, I can't even feel this thing. But then when you look down, like, you know, I just found some like bumpy roads. I kind of got on the side of my bike and was like looking at it. It's like, it's moving. It's for sure moving. What I would say the Grit felt like to me. So I run 35 in the front, usually in 40 PSI in the rear, just standard, you know, maybe 30, 35, whatever. What I would say the grit feels like is running like 15 to 20 PSI in the front tire, except for you don't feel that tire wobbling around like you would. So we've sold a few. I think it's a wonderful option for anybody that's riding a lot of rough roads and or if they have really sensitive hands. Because I got on average probably like 15 to 20 millimeters of travel. So not quite what we just talked about with a front true fork where you get maybe 40 or 50 millimeters, but more than you would get certainly out of just a tire. So that's, again, this is just all personal opinion. Some people love them, some people don't love them, and it's just.
Yeah. Are they tunable or are they set at a?
No. The fat bike fork, they have a stiff and a regular for over 180 pounds and a light for under. The grit, they only have one spring force. So
Cool. Any other questions in the Zoom? Let's see. So I have another question. Like we talked about this a little bit offline when we were setting up the audio a couple of days ago, but how is the pandemic affecting you guys in terms of supply chain, or are you guys fairly insulated?
Well, let's step back and look at the trade war, and then kind of it never really ended. The trade war really kind of, and then it went into the pandemic. The trade war didn't really upset Wolftooth too much because we make 95% of our stuff's made here. The only stuff we're really making overseas was the T-nuts and like some other little trinkety stuff that it's fasteners and the like, which very much echoes what we've seen in the pandemic so far. Because remember, the pandemic just hit the US. And so if you look at when China was interrupted, that was back in January, February when they shut down. And so again, we were pretty insulated just insofar as we don't buy much from China other than some fasteners and stuff. And dumb luck or whatever it was, we happened to have enough of those on hand when they were kind of going through their 8-week period of shutdown. Now it's gotten a lot more challenging because it's not our supply side. We're fine. We can still make this stuff. It's literally probably half our customer base is shut down. I'm constantly in contact with our Italian, Spanish, German, UK distributors like, hey, how's it going? And they're basically like, we have online sales, but all the shops are shut down. It's not like the US where they, in a lot of cases, it's not like the US where they have open shops. Now in the UK, I think they have some service open and stuff, but like in Spain, they're flat shut down. They were locked down. Right. And so that's been really tough for us because everybody's panicking. And the good news is, I think there's been kind of this reset in like people can't go to gyms. And so way, way more people are riding bikes. And the hope is that just for the good of the world, more than our business, but like the good of the world, that people like realize how awesome bike riding is and keep doing it after they can get back to their gym. So I think the bike industry is going to come out of this actually in a better spot. It's going to take, I think, longer than people think to do that. But I think next spring, I think the bike industry could be at a really good spot because of the recruitment that this pandemic has done for cycling. Hoping that, I think most people, once they get back into it, they're like, oh, this is really awesome. And then they keep doing it. And then maybe by next spring or summer, sometime after, they're going to be like, oh, I want to upgrade this, or I want to try a better bike or whatever. And I think that'll be good for the cycling industry broadly. But, we're just kind of hunkering down with respect to our business, where it's a skeleton staff, as many people as possible working from home. Production's still running. Online sales have been great. Sales to bike shops and distributors are significantly down. So we're just kind of weathering the storm, Russ, and hoping that our leaders can make a good plan for like how we get back out of this. It's safe for everybody, and also make sure that it's not fatal for too many small businesses. I worry that some of the bike shops that might have been like already struggling a little bit and hoping for like a really kick butt spring so they could, kind of come out of the funk, and then this hits and it's like, oh. So I worry about that the most, is that a lot of these great small shops, it's just going to be too tough on them. So hopefully that's not the case.
Yeah, for sure. Like, we know we've visited a lot of bike shops on the YouTube channel, and, a lot of our favorite ones are very like community oriented, but for that to happen, you need the ability to gather people physically. And, a lot of them had to like pivot to somehow creating online sales out of nowhere, just because that's what they have to do to stay open.
Yeah. And truly that's one of the value adds that a bike shop has versus online sales. You go eat coffee and then maybe have a beer after with your friends and go on the group ride and all that stuff. And like you said, that's gone. And so like whatever this plan is to get us back to some sense of normalcy, whether it's testing or, tracking or whatever it is, that's going to be the most critical thing I see, that like we need that. Otherwise there will be a lot of fatality as far as not just human lives, but also businesses.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we're coming up to the hour mark, so I think I'll wrap it up here. Thanks, Brendan, for joining us. Thank you guys in the Zoom chat for all your excellent questions. Thank you guys in the YouTube chat and YouTube viewers. I think we had at peak around like 200 concurrent viewers. That's pretty awesome on a Wednesday evening. If you guys like this content, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Consider supporting the channel on Patreon. Brendan, any last words that you want people to know?
Just keep pedaling and stay positive. We'll get through this thing we're in now, and like bikes are the best therapy. And if we're always here too, like there's a lot of questions, but we'll answer any kind of questions on email or chat or whatever. It's nothing's off limits. And if be kind to each other and be positive, and we'll come out the other side better.
Cool. All right. Well, on that note, thank you everyone for joining us this evening, and keep the supple side down. Okay, ended the